Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge that this week has been brutal. Another school shooting, the assassination of a polarizing political activist. This episode was planned before those events, but the themes will inevitably feel connected. Please know, I approach this story with care, not sensationalism, and with the hope of better understanding the psychology that drives mass violence. Everyone knows Columbine, Uvalde, Sandy Hook, Parkland, the horrors where children in school were targeted in mass murders. We ask, what is the world coming to? And too often we settle for oversimplified answers about modern society's missteps to these impossibly complex problems. But to borrow a phrase from Megan over at A Simpler Time, True Crime, I want to challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer time. And if you haven't listened to Megan's podcast, you should. Because today we're covering what some have called the birth of the modern mass murder, a school bombing right here in the United States that most people have never heard of. The Bath School Massacre of 1927 in Michigan. Mass murder didn't begin with this generation's problems. It doesn't hinge only on mental illness, poverty, or even access to weapons. Again and again, the same pattern emerges. Grievance, narcissism, fixation. One person decides that their pain entitles them to cause mass suffering. Andrew Kehoe, the man who bombed a school long before anyone was debating today's social issues, left behind a chilling wooden sign stenciled with the words, "Criminals are not born, they are made." What he missed was that society bore only a sliver of responsibility for his grievances. His own narcissism bore the rest. His inability to cope, to let go, or to seek help. That's where his psyche festered. He marinated in his own pain until vengeance felt like justice and violence felt like the answer to slights that countless others had endured without ever resorting to murder. If you believe your own grievances are more significant than everyone else's, then it's time to check yourself. Evil whispers that persecution entitles you to vengeance. Grace reminds you that you can withstand it. And that difference between bearing injustice and unleashing horror is what separates resilience from ruin. Because Andrew Kehoe was right. Criminals are not born, they are made. But what he failed to see is that he made himself into what he was. He chose vengeance over grace, violence over healing. I can absolutely sympathize with the pain and fear that he carried, but I have no tolerance for repaying one's grievances with violence against children. Andrew Kehoe let evil win in the one place where he had the ultimate domain, his own mind. This is the Bath School Massacre, the making of America's first school bomber, right now on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and mistress of my own mind.
And I have an abundance of skepticism.
We're so honored that you've joined us. If you want to help this tiny indie podcast grow, please leave a 5-star rating and review. Those reviews are our lifeblood in an ocean of shows with big producers and bigger ad budgets. We're basically a puppy begging for belly rubs, so go on, give us a rub, and drop that review. You can hit the tickle spot that makes us kick our leg by following us on TikTok, Instagram, X, and Facebook. Then liking, commenting, and sharing our stuff. It makes our tails wag. Grab merch in our spread shop. Links are in the show notes. For your new favorite tee, sweatshirt, or mug. In a completely unscientific study of the 3 dogs we can usually find in our yard, dogs automatically like people in Crime to Burn gear better than those that are not wearing it. And send your fire stories, case suggestions, feedback, and most importantly, dog photos to crimetoburn@gmail.com. So today we're going old times, so dig out your flapper costume and crank up the Model T because we're heading back to what many call a simpler time, 1927. But the truth is that there were no simpler times. It's only modern perspective and modern technology that cast the past in a warm glow. The same stresses that drive us today have plagued humans since the beginning of time. Resource scarcity, societal pressures, messy relationships. Blood pressures were spiking sky high long before we ever had the tools to measure it. And people have always reacted to stress in different ways, usually in the ways they were taught by the generations before. Some have escaped through alcohol or drugs, others can lash out with angry words, threats, or intimidation, and some are meek and suffer in silence. Now, we often fear the loud neighbor, the one prone to outbursts. But this case shows us that psychopathy doesn't always announce itself with loud fanfare in the form of theatrical outbursts. Sometimes it simmers quietly beneath the surface, nurturing dark intentions until the opportune moment arrives. And when vengeance finally erupts, an entire community is left to bear the scars of that dark legacy forever. I relied heavily on 2 books about the Bath school bombing, Maniac by Harold Schechter and Bath Massacre by Arnie Bernstein. You'll find both listed in the show notes, and if you're looking for a deeper dive into this case, you don't need to read both of them. They are very similar. Personally, I preferred Maniac because it offered more background and context, and it explains an incident with a gas stove a lot more clearly. We'll get into that later. Also, Bernstein claimed that Andrew Kehoe was younger than his stepmother, but I pulled the dates of her birth and he was not, which made me lean a bit heavier on Maniac over Bernstein's book. But when it comes to the facts of the bombing, either book is honestly a solid choice with one caveat. Bernstein's book includes photographs, and many of them show human remains, so if you are sensitive to traumatic imagery, Maniac would be the better option. And as we dive in, a word of caution. This case is nearly a century old. Most of what we know comes from newspaper accounts, and we all know that the press can and does get things wrong, and there are statements from survivors and townspeople. And any story retold over a century is bound to be stretched, misremembered, or misquoted. So while every note I share is sourced, keep in mind that the recounting of events may not be perfectly matched to what actually happened that day. It was May 18, 1927 in Bath Township, Michigan, a small farming town near Lansing. It was the very last day of school for the year. Just one more day stood between the kids and a summer free from books and study. The school housed grades 1 through 12. Many of the seniors weren't there that morning. They had taken their final exams a week earlier so that their grades could be processed before commencement, which was scheduled for the very next day. Superintendent Emery Hyuk was in the assembly room proctoring exams as the students filed in after the bell. Now, I tried my best to figure out how to pronounce Hyuk, which is spelled H-U-Y-C-K. I got Huck and Hyuk and
It's not hike, is it?
And hike. So if I bounce back and forth between them, I don't know which one's right. I have to say, when I say Hyuk, I feel like I'm doing a Three Stooges episode.
Or you're hawking a loogie.
Yeah, maybe I should go with hike. So if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I sincerely apologize, but I made every effort to figure it out. But Hike likely had other things on his mind. The school's boiler wasn't working, and without it, there was no electricity in the building that morning. 2 men were in the basement trying to sort it out when suddenly a massive explosion rocked the school. The floors heaved upward, 10 feet in some areas. One survivor recalled a strange moment of weightlessness watching the inkwell that had been on his desk floating in midair. Then, all at once, the building that had seemed to levitate came crashing back to earth under the pull of gravity. The roof of the north wing caved in. Exterior walls peeled away, windows shattered, sending glass raining down around the building. For a split second, there was stunned silence. Then it was broken by the sharp cacophony of voices, and they were screaming. Charlie Rawson, a railroad worker who lived near town, was outside when the blast ripped through Bath. At first, he thought the oil barrels stored at the railroad depot had exploded. He and a neighbor sprinted toward the sound. From their vantage point, they watched in horror as the roof of the school's north wing, perched on a hill overlooking the town, lifted 10 feet into the air before slamming back down, collapsing the entire wing. Half a mile from school, Mabel Ellsworth heard the blast. She rushed to the window, and as she looked out, she saw a massive dust cloud rising from the direction of the schoolhouse. Racing downstairs, she cried out to her husband, quote, "My God, the schoolhouse is blowed up," unquote. But her husband's eyes weren't on the school. He was staring at a neighboring farm, the property of Andrew Kehoe and his wife Nellie. Smoke and flames were pouring from their barn. And he wasn't the only one to notice. Oscar Bush, perched on a utility pole stringing wires for consumers' power, saw the fire from above. He scrambled down, shouting to his 2-man crew, and they piled into the car and sped toward the Kehoe farm. Back at school, chaos erupted. In the assembly room, which was not in the collapsed north wing, plaster rained from the ceiling as terrified children bolted for the exits. Some ran for the doors, others headed for the windows, which opened onto a steep roofline below. Superintendent Emery Huck feared the children would jump or fall and rushed onto the roof with them. As town folks sprinted toward the school, Huck yelled for ladders. Men veered off toward nearby houses, dragging back whatever ladders they could find, and Huck pleaded with the children to please stay calm and not jump, just to wait for rescue. But these kids were in shock, and many leapt anyway, carried away from the roof by adrenaline to a lower roofline and then to the ground. Parents arrived, faces frozen in terror, running full speed toward the building. Children from other wings staggered out, dazed, their hair and faces coated in dust, giving them a ghost-like pallor. At last, ladders were hoisted against the roofline near the assembly room, and one by one the children were helped down. When the last student that had been perched on the roof outside the assembly room was safe, Huck descended the ladder himself. Then he turned and ran away from the building. A desperate rescue mission was underway. Men in work clothes and women in house dresses climbed into the ruins, hurling bricks and roof tiles aside in a frantic effort to reach the trapped children. Mothers screamed names into the rubble. Some parents, with relief, found their children stumbling out, coated in dust, shaken but alive. Others dove straight into the wreckage, tearing at concrete and splintered wood with bare hands, desperate to find their babies. Some watched the life seep from children they were trying to free before they could reach them. As Oscar Bush and his two-man crew arrived at the Kehoe farm, the fire was roaring. Multiple outbuildings were burning, and the house was on fire. But it hadn't yet spread through the whole house. They raced inside, intent on saving any furnishings that they could. They pushed a couch out a window and began grabbing anything that might be of value to hurl out the window when Oscar grabbed something unusual. He wasn't immediately sure what it was, but as he spilled it out of the window, he recognized it. Dynamite. He later recalled it was somewhere between 10 and 18 sticks of it. He and his crew made a hasty retreat out of the building, warning other neighbors arriving and intent on a similar mission of the dynamite, and the entire congregation beat a hasty retreat away from the house. As they did, the screams of a woman on the street reached them. The school blew up. As the men reached their car, the Kehoe house exploded, throwing their bodies against the vehicle. They weren't injured, but they were badly shaken as they climbed into the car and made a hasty retreat from the property to head to the school. After they'd left, another neighbor arrived at the Kehoe farm, Sidney Howell and his sons. They had jumped in their car and headed toward the farm when they saw the flames, not yet realizing there was a disaster at the school. When they arrived, every building except the henhouse was absolutely engulfed in flames. Standing in awe of the tragedy unfolding before them, with no power to arrest the blazing inferno, a truck rolled out of the thick smoke toward them. Andrew Kehoe, the owner of the farm, leaned out the window. "Boys," Andrew said, "you are my friends and you'd better get out of here. You'd better go down to the school." He said that with what Howell later described as a maniacal grin, and then drove off toward town, leaving his neighbors dumbfounded. Meanwhile, Superintendent Huck, who had just helped the children off the school's roof, sprinted through town. His destination wasn't home or safety. It was the telephone office, a small shed tucked behind a local home. Inside, the switchboard was manned by a 17-year-old girl named Lenora Babcock. At Huck's urgent instruction, Lenora began cranking the lines, calling neighboring towns and pleading for help. Fire departments, police departments, hospitals, even the state police and state government were notified of the unfolding disaster in Bath. Once Huck was certain that the calls were being made, he turned and ran back toward the wreckage, ready to rejoin the desperate effort to free the children trapped beneath the collapsed north wing. Monty Ellsworth was on the road to the school for the second time that morning. When his wife had first told him of the explosion, he had raced to the building where his son was a student. But seeing the scale of the rescue, he'd been sent for supplies, ropes that might be used to help hoist the collapsed roof. So he'd gone back to his shop for them, and now he was returning to join the fight. As Monty neared the school, another sight stopped him cold. Andrew Kehoe was driving toward town in his own vehicle. Monty later recalled the expression on his face, a strange grin that bared every tooth, the look of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. Several men had reasoned that they might lift the collapsed roof by using a utility pole as a lever. They set out with the vehicle, intent to drag one back, just as Andrew Kehoe pulled up to the school in his truck. Now, accounts vary about what happened next, but one thing is certain. Superintendent Emory Huck who had often butted heads with Kehoe during his time as a school board treasurer, stepped onto the running board of Kehoe's truck to talk to him. Some witnesses said there was a scuffle. Others recall hearing Kehoe mutter, "That's fine, you can go with me." And then, the truck exploded. In an instant, both Kehoe and Superintendent Huck were gone. How he set it off has never been clear. Some believe Kehoe fired into a homemade bomb constructed of dynamite with a gun. Others say he flipped a switch in the truck. But either way, the results were catastrophic. The truck wasn't just loaded with explosives. Kehoe had packed it with bolts, nails, and metal scraps, turning the blast into a giant pipe bomb. Shrapnel ripped outwards into rescuers working furiously to free trapped children. One man lost a leg and died on the way to the hospital. Another was killed instantly by the blast. A child who had survived the first blast with only minor injuries was struck in the abdomen with shrapnel, a wound that would take his life just hours later. Even a mother that was nearly a block away was hit. Shrapnel destroyed her eye and tore into her skull as she held her infant daughter. Miraculously, she survived. Even more miraculously, the baby was unharmed. When Lansing's fire chief received Lenora Babcock's urgent call, he assumed the Bath School was burning. He immediately dispatched a chemical truck, one of the early rigs that used sodium bicarbonate and sulfuric acid to propel its stream into the flames. But when the apparatus arrived under the command of the assistant fire chief, he quickly realized the truth. They didn't need a fire engine, they needed a miracle. He went straight to the phone office and told the chief to send every man and every piece of equipment he could find. Within 15 minutes, police and fire crews were flooding into Bath, but the parents of the township never stopped their work. They clawed at rubble with their bare hands, desperate to reach the children still trapped. Each small body pulled from the ruins was carried to a nearby hill, which the press grimly named Hospital Hill. There, nurses, doctors, and parents worked side by side, bandaging wounds, comforting survivors, and loading the injured into ambulances bound for neighboring hospitals. Some children were carried by townsfolk to nearby homes, laid gently on couches, cots, and beds until transport could be arranged. Those with cars pressed them into service as makeshift ambulances. And still others, the children who could not be saved, were laid in the grass and covered with sheets and blankets, waiting for their parents to identify them. Charles V. Lane, chief of the Fire Marshal's Division of the Michigan Department of Public Safety, soon arrived on scene. At first, he suspected the blast was accidental, perhaps caused by the high-test gasoline often used in rural school heating systems. But that theory didn't last long. A state police officer walked up to him carrying 4 sticks of Hercules dynamite. They were the same sticks Oscar Bush and his crew had hurled out of the Kehoe house while trying to save the furnishings from the flames. He was informed of the horrific truck explosion and that the perpetrator of the truck explosion had owned the farm where the dynamite was found. In that instant, Lane's assumptions collapsed. This was no accident. The Bath disaster was deliberate, a carefully planned act of mass murder. As the dark realization settled over Chief Lane, 2 officers, a Lansing police captain and a state police deputy, were combing through the school's basement. There in the shadows, they made a nauseating discovery. A pile of debris from the collapsed ceiling concealed something sinister. Sticks of pyrrolitol, a powerful explosive. And that wasn't all. Wires trailed from the explosives, disappearing into the rubble, their source unknown. The officers froze and then bolted for the stairs. Bursting outside, they shouted for rescuers to stop and move away from the building. The school, they warned, could blow again. But what exactly was pyrrolitol, and how did Andrew Kehoe come to use it to wire a school full of children to explode? After World War I, the U.S. government was left with massive surpluses of smokeless powder. By the 1920s, DuPont had found a way to help dispose of it. They blended 60% smokeless powder with 34% sodium nitrate and 6% nitroglycerin dynamite to create a new explosive, pyrrolitol. It was marketed as a farm tool meant for blasting out tree stumps and boulders. Farmers could buy it in 50-pound boxes, each holding 160 cartridges. And Andrew Kehoe was a farmer, but he wasn't like most farmers in Bath. Andrew's father, Philip Kehoe, had had a large family. By the time Andrew was born, Philip already had 6 daughters. Andrew was his very first son, and the heir to the Kehoe estate. 2 sisters and a younger brother followed, but tragedy struck when Andrew's mother died, leaving Philip with 9 children, 7 of them girls. Andrew's father, Philip Kehoe, was a devout Catholic and a respected figure in the community. He involved himself in local politics, held public office at times, and was known for his very outspoken opinions about how public money was used. Philip believed passionately that the community should have a voice in how public tax dollars were spent. He told anyone who would listen, and he drilled that lesson into his oldest son. If public money was going toward utilities, schools, or local government, then the people should have a say in how those institutions were run. But running a household of 9 children as a widower proved too much for Philip Kehoe. He remarried. This was his 3rd time being married. His first wife had died just 2 years into their marriage. His second wife, Andrew's mother, had passed away when Andrew was about 18. Philip's new wife, Frances Wilder, was 25 years younger than him, and only a few years older than Andrew. A widow with children of her own, Frances reportedly never got along with Andrew, but Philip married her anyway, and Andrew was displeased. Now by then Andrew was a grown man, so, with rising tensions at home, he left his father's home and struck out on his own. He reportedly attended Michigan Agricultural College, which would later become Michigan State University, and then studied electrical engineering at a school in St. Louis. Now Andrew had grown up during the electrification race between Tesla and Edison, and he was said to be constantly tinkering and inventing. To those who knew him, electrical engineering seemed like his natural path. At some point during his years away, Andrew suffered a severe head injury. Accounts suggest he was left unconscious, either in a coma or drifting in and out of one for several weeks. The details are murky and no one knows what lasting effects it may have had. Eventually, Andrew did return to his father's farm to help keep it going. Part of that work involved using pyritol to clear stumps and boulders from the fields, the very same explosive he would later use to horrific effect. But relations at home remained icy. Frances, whom the family called Fanny, was only 13 years older than Andrew, and some believe he resented her. His father even fathered another child with her at the age of 69, a daughter named Irene. As the eldest son, Andrew had long assumed he would inherit the farm, but with Fanny in the picture, younger and with far more life left in her than her husband, Andrew may have seen her as a threat to his inheritance that he believed was rightfully his. That is, until Fanny met her untimely death. At the time, it was written off as a tragic household accident, but in hindsight, after Andrew Kehoe bombed a school full of children in Bath Township, many wondered if it had been something more sinister. Franny's kitchen was outfitted with a gas stove, not the kind we know today, but an older style that used crude gasoline stored in an overhead tank connected to the burners by a pipe. They were convenient, faster than waiting for coal or wood, but notoriously dangerous. Newspapers of the time ran constant warnings about explosions, reminding users to follow strict rules. Don't fill the tank while the burners are lit, don't light the stove after a leak, and above all, never set the tank on the stove to refill it.
Never ever.
One Sunday, as Fanny prepared the family meal, her stove exploded. Burning fuel splashed across her body. Her husband, slowed by a cane, struggled toward her screams while Andrew ran in from the fields. He smothered the flames and dragged her to a bed. Then Andrew set off for a neighbor's house to summon help. But instead of bursting through the door in a frenzy, he knocked politely. Calmly, he asked the mistress of the house to call a doctor, explaining almost casually that Franny had been burned. As he turned to leave, he paused and added one more suggestion. She might call a priest as well. 8 months later, after Franny's death, Andrew married Ellen Agnes Price, known as Nellie. Now, Nellie's father worked for his brother, who was a wealthy businessman, and at the time of their marriage, both Andrew and Nellie were considered unusually old to be newlyweds. He was nearly 40, and she was 37. Nellie moved into the Kehoe farm with her new husband and stepped into the role of de facto stepmother to 10-year-old Irene, Andrew's half-sister. Not long after their wedding, the local Catholic diocese announced plans for a new church. Each family in the parish was asked to contribute $400 toward the project. Andrew Kehoe flatly refused. From that day forward, he never again attended church alongside his wife. In 1917, Nellie's wealthy uncle, the one who had employed her father, passed away. Among his estate holdings was an 80-acre farm in Bath, Michigan. Andrew and Nellie arranged to purchase the property for $12,000. Can you imagine getting 80 acres for $12,000 with a 3-story house on it?
Land used to be kind of cheap.
The deal called for a $6,000 down payment with a mortgage of $360 a month to the uncle's estate until the balance was paid. The transaction was overseen by the family's attorney, a man named Joseph Duneback. By this time, Andrew's father had died, and the Kehoe family farm had passed into Andrew's name. He quickly arranged to sell it and moved with Nellie to Bath, where the new farm came with a 3-story house. As for Irene, the little half-sister Andrew had once resented, well, she vanishes from the record at this point. She's never mentioned again. Neighbors were shocked by Kehoe long before he ever bombed the school. He worked his farm dressed like a businessman, pressed shirts and vests, and if his shirt got dirty, he'd run inside and change into a clean one. Local farmers found this baffling. Honestly, I find this baffling. Kehoe was an odd duck. His barn was cleaner than most people's homes. Every tool was arranged just so, and he was always tinkering, inventing devices to make his farm work easier. Everyone agreed he was polite, but not warm. No one considered him a close friend, more of an acquaintance. He could be nice enough, unless you crossed him. One neighbor's terrier made the mistake of digging along Kehoe's fence line. When the dog didn't come home, the owner went to ask Andrew if she'd seen it. His response? He'd shot it. Just matter of fact. She was stunned, left without saying a word. Another neighbor recalled watching him drive his horses too hard. Later, Kehoe admitted he'd gotten frustrated and beaten one of them to death. That was the kind of man he was, precise, controlled, outwardly polite, but capable of sudden, chilling cruelty. I have to wonder if Kehoe may have been neurodivergent. As a child, people said that while other kids were playing, he was tinkering with electronics. He didn't marry until much later in life. He was described as meticulous, particular about how everything had to be arranged, and neighbors agreed he seemed fine, polite even, but no one ever felt close to him. Of course, being neurodivergent doesn't make someone dangerous, far from it, but it may help explain why he stood out as unusual in a small farming community where everyone else lived and worked in very different ways. In the book about this case, there's a twisted undercurrent, the suggestion that something was always off about Kehoe and that people sensed it but couldn't recognize it until it was too late. But to me, it feels just like what they weren't noticing wasn't some sinister flaw at all, but neurodivergence. Kehoe was living in a time before we had language for autism, ADHD, or any of the spectrums we understand today. He was a particular, precise, and socially distant man. In a small farming town where everyone else bonded over chores, church, and community life, a difference stood out. Of course, none of that explains or excuses what he eventually did, but it does shift the lens from he was always a monster to he was always different and people didn't know what to make of him. Bath was a rural community. For generations, children were taught in one-room schoolhouses where a single teacher handled every grade on a modest stipend. But across America, schools were changing. Reformers pushed to consolidate those little schoolhouses into larger institutions with multiple teachers, buses bringing in the farm kids, and more opportunities, the same kinds of opportunities that city children had. Not everyone thought this was necessary. Many parents believed that school was only for reading, writing, and arithmetic, and that farming would be learned at home. When the idea of consolidating Bath's schools came to a vote, Andrew Kehoe was firmly against it. Following in his father's footsteps, he rallied against what he saw as unnecessary government spending. Why should he, a man with no children, be taxed to pay for buses, salaries, and a brand new building? To Kehoe, the very idea was an insult to his beliefs. In 1922, the Bath Consolidated School opened its doors to about 250 children. At the same time, farmers like Kehoe, who had prospered during the war when crop prices soared, were watching those prices collapse. As Europe recovered, it imported less American grain, and by 1918 the market had begun to tumble, and by the early 1920s it was in freefall. Kehoe was practically apoplectic. He urged other farmers to limit their production in hopes of driving prices back up. But farmers gonna farm, and prices kept falling. Hard times were coming for Bath and for Kehoe. So when the tax burden of the new school came due, Kehoe didn't just see it as illogical, he saw it as a personal affront. One more blow to his already precarious finances. In the post-war farm crisis, he was barely making enough to cover his expenses. By 1922, he had stopped paying the mortgage owned to his wife's family's estate. Not a man to sit quietly while the government spent his money, Kehoe ran for the school board in 1924 and won. With his meticulous nature, he was quickly made the treasurer. It was the perfect seat for someone obsessed with reining in what he viewed as a hemorrhage of public funds. And Kehoe wasted no time. He exposed contracts he believed were based on favoritism rather than the lowest bid. He fought bitterly against expenses he considered frivolous, like playground equipment for the children. Superintendent Emery Huck, meanwhile, pushed for investments he felt were essential: books, laboratory equipment, teacher raises, in order to get the school accredited and keep it accredited. He and Kehoe clashed constantly. Kehoe was the one to hand out the monthly paychecks for all of the teachers, and more than once he would forget to give Huck his. He even managed to slash Huck's vacation time from 2 weeks to 1 and cut his annual raises in half. The animosity between the two men was the elephant in the room at every board meeting. When a seat on the town council opened, Kehoe was appointed until the next election, but he made few friends in that role. He scrutinized every penny, refused to compromise, and when the seat came up for a vote in 1926, he was swiftly defeated. He said nothing, showed no emotion, sat through the swearing-in of his successor. No one imagined the anger simmering beneath his calm expression. Still, he continued on the school board, and in his miserly ways when the building needed repairs, Kehoe often offered to do them himself to save money. It started with a bee infestation that 2 other people had failed to clear, so Kehoe volunteered, and the problem was soon gone. After that, any repair that exceeded the janitor's abilities fell to Kehoe. And so he was given a key to the building, a key that allowed him access to the school at any hour of the day or night. Meanwhile, something was terribly wrong with Nellie. She was plagued by debilitating headaches, her body wasted away with extreme weight loss, and a relentless cough robbed her of rest. Just weeks after her husband lost his council seat, Nellie was admitted to the hospital. Necessary, but a crushing expense for a family already buckling under financial strain. By 1926, Nellie's family had been remarkably patient. Kehoe was 4 years in arrears on his mortgage payments, and yet they hadn't pressed him. That year, Nellie was due a $500 disbursement from her uncle's estate, the same estate holding the unpaid mortgage. The family's attorney wrote to Nellie explaining that he intended to apply her inheritance directly to the debt, and Nellie seemed agreeable, but her husband was not. Kehoe took the matter to court and won. The judge encouraged him to renegotiate the mortgage terms, but by then Kehoe had convinced himself that the farm had been sold to him at an unfair price, and he was being persecuted by what he now saw as an unreasonable agreement. It was another step in his growing fixation. But he was not just unlucky, but the victim of a system stacked against him. 7 more months passed, still no mortgage payments, still no effort by Kehoe to renegotiate. Finally, the family's attorney, believing he was acting in their best interest, unaware of Nellie's worsening health, drafted a foreclosure notice and sent it to the sheriff for delivery. He explained to the family that it was just a formality to protect them. They told the attorney that they had no intention of acting on it, especially with Nellie in and out of the hospital. But by then it was too late. The notice had already been served. The attorney did try to stop the delivery, but the sheriff had already put it in Kehoe's hands. Kehoe said nothing about the foreclosure notice. Nellie continued in and out of the hospital, their expenses piling higher every week. But by then, Kehoe had already begun stockpiling explosives. Because he didn't yet own a truck, a neighbor kindly drove him to a nearby town where he bought 500 pounds of pyritol. 500 pounds. That's 1,600 cartridges of explosive.
I don't know if I'd acquiesce to my neighbor's request to carry 500 pounds of explosives anywhere.
It was recounted in the book. The guy that took him to buy it said that, they got the pyritol and they got the blasting caps. And he was like, make sure you keep those blasting caps in your pocket for this whole ride, because the pyritol won't explode without a significant force. But apparently the neighbor wasn't super comfortable with it. And he wasn't finished. He soon purchased a truck of his own, giving him freedom to run errands of a more explosive nature without raising suspicion. In Lansing, he bought 2 more boxes of dynamite from the Hercules Powder Company. Around the same time, a nearby road crew arrived one morning to find their dynamite cache missing. No one suspected Kehoe then, but later, it all seemed too likely. And honestly, who leaves dynamite just sitting around the job site? By the spring of 1927, Andrew Kehoe was a man under siege, at least in his own mind. His farm was slipping away. His wife's health was failing. His battles with the school board consumed him. And beneath the surface, he was quietly stockpiling hundreds of pounds of explosives. With a key to the school, access to its room after hours, and a growing obsession with grievance, Kehoe had everything he needed to carry out the deadliest act of school violence in American history. And next week, we'll walk through the days leading up to the explosion, the investigation, and the aftermath in part 2 of the Bath School Massacre, the making of America's first school bomber on Crime to Burn.
That's where you eat a lot of fiber. Nature just works its way through your intestines. I didn't go to no school for this. It has a special stink.
We need to de-spider the porch.
You just hire like a bigger spider.
There's some big ones out there, but they seem to be inviting the little ones to live with them. They're decorating for Halloween.
Spiders just want to have fun.
No, make my voice sticky. Yeah, whenever I start to record, my voice decides, now's the time. Send all the mucus.
You need me to glue some sandpaper to your seat?
No, please don't. Did you lift something heavy yesterday?
My nuts.
Well, you lift that every day.
No one likes back-talking knees.
Nobody likes back-bending knees either. They weren't exactly the highest quality bar stools we could find.
Don't you ever say that about my bar stool.
I'm pretty sure whoever designed these was somehow in collusion with a chiropractor.
Do you think he sits down and is like, I wonder how this is going to feel in my asshole? Bath Massacre by Ani...
Ani Blah is available at aniblah.com. Don't they have a pronouncy thing on your little box?
Charlie Rawson, a railroad worker who lived...
Railroad.
That the oil barrels stored at the railroad depot had
You
exploded.
built yourself a tongue twister, didn't you?
The railroad depot had exploded.
The oil barrel.
At first, he had to stop laughing.
At first.
At first, he thought that the oil barrels stored at the... Can't do it.
And there they found a little burp.
Andrew's
That's
father...
farmers in a bathhouse.
That's different. This episode's brought to you by post-war surplus explosives, because nothing says back to normal quite like handing out dynamite at wholesale prices.
I have too much inhibition right now. It's hard to be witty and funny before noon. I heard a funny joke on the internet this week.
What?
You know why your butt crack goes up and down, vertical, instead of sideways, horizontal?
Why?
Because if it was sideways, horizontal, every time you went down a slide, it would go... I wonder how you spell...
I don't know. We'll see what the caption program does with that. It'll be fun. I'm not a boss.
No one's telling you to.
I'm a mentor. There's a difference.
Mental.
No, mentor.
It sounds like an evil villain. Mentor. Mentor's superpower is grooming. Is it sad that she rejects Canadian programming? I don't know.
It was when Wilford Brimley played the grandpa. I always thought he looked kind of like a walrus.
He does look walrusy, doesn't he? I mean, Wilfred kind of sounds walrusy, too.
Right, Wilfred the
If I had a
walrus.
walrus, I'd name him Wilfred.
Anyway, don't into coffee pots.
Only soap dispensers.
Even that's questionable. What's the big metal guy's name? Colossus? Why would he... He's made out of metal. Wouldn't he rust? Is Magneto magnetic? Or is it just a name?
I don't know how you can be such a big nerd and have never read comic books. We're talking about like a mutant revolutionary war that's a little petty for...
Isn't being in a soap dispenser a little petty? You were on a horsey.
All those movies smell like old balls. They just smell like 70s carpet and cigarette butts or something. They have a smell to them. I don't know how that makes any sense. I don't feel like Mr. Hanky got enough recognition, honestly. I don't know why you got a thing for Will Smith.
I don't.
Seems like you do. You mentioned him several times today.
One movie.
You having dreams about black guys again?
No. And then we went on that terrible idea that we were going to watch every single Kevin Spacey movie.
That
turns out he was only in one good movie. Not
to be a good idea. That was like self-inflicted pain.
I think it was like the third movie where like we can't do this to ourselves anymore.
That's how I feel about Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, I could take or leave Hugh Jackman.
Not me.
I can't see his face now.
Take him all night long. Oh my god.
I can't see his face now without imagining balls on his neck. Honestly, that's a little disturbing.
I think I may have always envisioned him with some balls hanging about him somewhere, glistening gently.
Got one of those podcasting cramps.
I will retain my skepticism until next week, and I'll probably just keep on holding on to it forever. Until next week, keep your balls misty. And I remain mildly alarmed.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Hi there, I'm award-winning stand-up comedian Taylor Ruddle from New Zealand. Podcasts? Yeah, we got them too. And in my podcast, Ruddle Me This, you get a front row seat seeing exactly what it's like trying to come up in this crazy business that is stand-up comedy. I interview other comedians and artists from different disciplines, as well as other generally interesting people from around New Zealand. Oh, and we also do spooky paranormal episodes. Ooh. So if this mix of eclectic nonsense appeals to you, download Ruddle Me This on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcatcher.